live nonprofit Q&A series. This time we'll be discussing how our nonprofits are returning to work and back to delivering their programs and their mission. First housekeeping item, we wanted to let you all know that we are recording the session. We'll make the slides available to all of you automatically within about 48 hours. You'll receive those. Also, feel free to type in questions as we go. By all means, we want to hear from you and have this be as interactive as possible. And we will try to answer those questions real time or get back to you at another part during the session. Secondly, we'll start with quick introductions. My name is Mike Bolton. I'm a partner with Armonino. I specialize in servicing our nonprofit clients, and I'm honored to be delivering this session to you with Jason from Carterbury Consulting.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mike. Jason Levy from Carterbury Consulting. And we're also honored to be joined by Scott Devine from TheaterWorks. Scott's the CFO, and also Dana Littman from the YMCA of LA. She is the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer and General Counsel. And we're going to get to them in a few moments to get to some of their guidelines and some of their practices and what they've been working through as far as trying to return to work. But we're just going to go through a few slides here on our firms and also on some of the survey results that apply to our topic today.
So quick introductions of the firms. If you're not familiar with Armonino, we are a full service CPA and consulting firm, one of the 20 largest in the country. We serve over 800 nonprofit organizations in a variety of capacities, traditional tax compliance work, outsourced accounting work, financial statement audit services, but also a variety of strategic consulting services such as software implementations and enterprise strategy and transformation planning. Naturally, recently we've been spending a lot of time talking about the current events with COVID and the crisis that we're in. So what we have done is developed a COVID-19 resource center that is available on the front page of our website. It's housing all the resources we've published related to the current crisis, whether they be webinars like this, articles, checklists, any resources that we've developed, we have for you. So feel free to look on our website and you can get access to all of that information, including two specific things that we wanted to share to make you aware of that are relevant to today's topic, which is first being our nationwide COVID tracker. So we've developed a database that's live up to date constantly each day with COVID trends by state, by county. So you can track the quantitative information about COVID relative to your organization, where your people are, or where your programs are being delivered. And we hope ultimately this is helping our clients, our nonprofit organizations decide how and when to get back to business or back to delivering programs. That's just one tool to help you make that decision. Another quick tool we wanted to share is our Return to Work app. This is something that we've developed to really get into the nitty-gritty to help organizations like yourself get through the tactical steps to bringing your employees back to work. And so this is an app that can help facilitate communication and safety protocols to bring your people back, tracking applicable health checks, organizing office space to ensure appropriate distancing, and ultimately a safe outcome to bring your people back into the office. So again, if you go to our COVID Resource Center on the website, you can see a link to look at more information about that, or feel free to ask us if you are curious about it.
And just a quick moment on Carterbury. We are an independent investment advisory firm, oversee about 24 billion in client assets, and we work with clients of all types, probably a lot of similar organizations is what's calling in on the phone today, community foundations, educational organizations, religious, arts and cultural, and we also work with family offices. And as we've been saying on these phone calls, what we think is critically important is working really closely with our clients to understand their objectives, their needs, and ultimately delivering a custom investment strategy to our clients. And as we've also been talking about on these calls, really what we try to do is stay as close to possible to our clients and understand what they're going through, what their challenges are, and how that may impact their portfolio. And Alexa, if you wouldn't mind just rolling forward one more slide. That has led us a little bit to working with Armonino and piggybacking the survey that they did a few months ago. And ultimately, these call series that some of you have been joining in today's last call series that we're having today, where we are trying to help some of the nonprofits go through and work through this crisis, this unprecedented crisis. And so if you were able to join us for the last 3 weeks, you heard us listen in to talk to the challenges and the uncertainty around the Paycheck Protection Program. Last week, we had a great session on strategy and really what organizations are trying to do as we go through the uncertainty of this crisis, and you're trying to put together your budget, you're trying to put together your financial plan, and really deal with a timeline that is ever changing. And today, we're going to talk about the topic in a little bit of a different lens around return to work. And I think naively, speaking for myself, when we picked this topic and when we heard from nonprofits that this was of interest a couple months ago, I naively assumed that by almost August, we would have a lot more guidance, and maybe we would even be back to some form of normal work in August. And it seems like not only are we going backwards in some cases, but that we're probably going to be at some different level of return to work for longer than maybe some of us thought. And we've got two great panelists today with really different views on what this may look like for different organizations like you all calling in on the phone today. Dana from the YMCA has a really interesting perspective because organizations like the YMCA have been engaged throughout this crisis. They've been delivering their services to those in need throughout the crisis, and are also trying to figure out how to continue that, not only for their staff, but for the people who they deliver their services to. And Scott from TheaterWorks, they've been shut down since, I think Scott told us, March 12th. And there's a whole nother set of operations and challenges that presents in trying to figure out how they're going to go back to work, not only to put on their productions, but also to bring folks back to their theaters. So while everybody's challenges are unique, it'll be really great to hear about what they've been planning for, dealing with, learning from, and that's really the goal of today's call. So the format is we're going to go through some of the slides in a moment. Mike's going to walk us through some of the information we gathered on the survey. And then we're going to hear from our speakers as to what they've been going through and what they've been learning along the way. So, Mike, I'll just hand it back over to you to go through some of the survey results.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Jason. And I'll keep this fairly brief because we want to have you hear from our panelists, Scott and Dana, first and foremost. So, quick highlight on the survey for those of you that have listened to the first 2 sessions of this series. Some of this would be familiar. If you're new to this, as Jason mentioned, we deployed a survey back in May to both of our client bases of nonprofits. We received about 160 replies to the survey, and there was a lot of questions around multiple topics, but we're highlighting a few of the results relevant to today's topic. And before getting into those, to give you an idea of who replied to the survey, the majority were within California, a split between Northern and Southern. Majority of the respondents were either the CEO or executive director or the finance leader of the organization. And then we did ask for what subsector within nonprofits the organization served, and about a little over 40% were either within social services or the arts, but there were other people that responded from all other subniche, whether it be private education or other subsectors. And in terms of size of the organizations that replied, a wide variety, but the majority of them were of over $10 million in total assets. So that gives you an idea of the folks that were replying if you weren't one of them. So a quick overview of a few of the findings relevant to the return to work topic. First, one of the questions that we asked in the survey was about either what's your reaction to some of these particular topics in the crisis. And again, this was as of May, and so obviously things have changed, but we asked folks to decide, were they planning to increase, reduce, or keep the same some of these items, whether they be employee benefits, office space, staff training and development. And as you can see, the large majority planned no change to employee benefits, no change to office space. A considerable number planned to reduce capital expenditures. And then software and technology solutions, we saw a fair amount of responses that plan to increase in that area, presumably to facilitate working from home or working remotely for the foreseeable future, again, as of that May timeframe. Next, we asked about expectations regarding funding, looking ahead the next 18 months. 90% of folks who replied in the survey expected some form of decline in funding. Probably no surprise there. 43% of them expected a significant decline, over 25% in their funding of some kind, whether it be individual donations, government funding, or earned revenue, which is an example we hear from Scott with his theater. We'll of course hear from Dana and Scott about how these declines are impacting their ability to both return to work and bring their employees back, and also deliver their programs within their mission. Lastly, besides revenues, we asked about the biggest challenges nonprofits are expecting. This was a free-form entry question, and we compiled the most common answers. Employee wellness was overwhelmingly the most common or top response, followed by financial health. And again, we'll hear from Scott and Dana about their experiences here. Naturally, everyone's very concerned about their employment base, their people within their organization. Financial health is front of mind, and those are very well connected. And so we'll hear their stories about how they're facing those challenges both now and their expectations for the future months as they begin to try to bring people back into the fold. So those were some, again, quick data points from the survey. And again, those of you that filled out the survey, you'll receive a full in-depth, I believe you actually have now, report of all the results from the survey. But that was also back in May. We know a lot has changed since then. Many of our nonprofits are grappling with when to return to work physically with their employees and how they can also provide their mission critical programs. So we want to share a few thoughts on how you can return to work to get you thinking about the process more than I'm sure you already have been, and help you think about some questions you may want to ask our panelists, Scott and Dana, as we go through the conversation. So we have an article that's on our website that you can click through when you want to read it in more depth, but it lists out a checklist of some things to think about as you return to work from an employment perspective. Many of you are likely already on top of many of these, but a few important reminders that I thought were relevant to share. Making sure you're implementing the Families First Act into your policies, handling emergency leave pay, for example. You want to be aware of that and ready to comply. Rules for common areas. I thought this was a simple, somewhat obvious, but tactic to use. Visual cues, what is the maximum capacity for various rooms is always helpful. Shared common areas. Rules for deliveries. Many organizations are getting deliveries of some kind. You want to have rules about how you're interacting with those vendors who may have their own policies. So whether it be visual cues written on the building or physical locations where they can interact with your people. And then lastly, keeping privacy front of mind, whether it be HIPAA rights or other privacy matters. As we're sharing information more electronically and remotely, that's becoming more of a sensitive issue as well. Lastly, a few additional tactical considerations for you to think about. Updating those employee handbooks, internal policies. Would love to hear from Dana. This is probably something she's been spending a lot of time doing lately. Also think about new policies you've not yet memorialized, such as employee vacation reporting. Where have your people been throughout their time away from work, and how might that impact the rest of the employees when they come back to physically being in an office or location. Also office distancing, health checks, memorializing those policies so that you have them in place, having individuals within your organization acknowledge receiving them, and that they are fully aware of how to comply with your organization's new policy. Again, when you get this presentation after today, you can click through these links to see more information about them. But what I'd like to do now is jump straight into hearing from Scott and Dana. And why don't we start with both Scott and Dana giving a brief background on your organization, maybe a little bit about what you do, where things stand for you at this point in time, and how you might be approaching returning from shutdown. Dana, if we could start with you, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about our process, and then at the end, I'll turn to some more specifics on how to return to the work. And obviously, I'm open to any questions. So just to start off, as everybody already mentioned, I'm the Chief human resources officer. Risk also reports into me. I'm also the general counsel, so I wear a lot of hats, as most of all of you do who work at nonprofits. So I've had the unique experience of seeing COVID both from the employee standpoint and the bringing back our members standpoint. So just to tell you a little bit about our story, on Sunday, March 15th, I was in a sorority house in Philadelphia. My daughter's university had just decided to close. So I was packing up her belongings and my cell phone started just vibrating, text messages, phone calls, things were blowing up. And I was notified that Mayor Garcetti had just made the fateful decision to close bars, nightclubs, gyms, and restaurants beginning at midnight due to the pandemic. First came denial. Was this really true? There were so many internet rumors and hoaxes going on about what Trump was going to do closing borders that I wasn't sure this was true. Unfortunately, after a quick Google search, I realized it was true. So after the denial came the panic. What was I going to do? It was nearly midnight on the East Coast, and we had 26 branches that were set to open at 6 a.m. the next morning. So how are we going to notify our staff of the closure? How are we going to notify our members of the closure? But more importantly, how we were going to survive this global pandemic and ensure the long-term sustainability of the LAY. We've been serving people for 140 years, and we want to be around for the next 140 years. So before the pandemic, we had approximately 2,650 employees. However, we quickly realized most of these were part-time workers who worked in healthy lifestyles, membership, and the like. And we realized with the facilities shut down, this would be difficult to support our employees. So we made the difficult decision to furlough the majority of them, which I have to say for me personally, I've been working for over 30 years. I think that was one of the hardest and saddest days of my career, to say goodbye to people, and really struggled with that decision. Then a few days later, Mayor Garcetti and Governor Newsom issued the stay-at-home orders, which required us to not only close our gyms, but to close our facilities entirely and seize all of our normal operations and programming. So as a result, we furloughed an additional 170 employees that had stayed on that weren't working directly in the gym facility. So we provided our employees with 1 week of pay, and we are paying both the employee and the employer portion of health benefits for our furloughed employees through July 31st. So that was a decision that we decided that we really wanted to do what we could to help our employees, and we felt that with the pandemic, health insurance would be really, really important. So I'm very proud that we were able to do that and that our board supported us in that decision. Obviously, furloughed employees were eligible to collect federal and state unemployment. So in mid-June, we received the great news that Mayor Garcetti would be allowing gyms to reopen. So throughout, from the shutdown in March to June, we were working very closely, putting together policies and procedures about returning to work. We were putting together a presentation. We were going to have all our employees go through a pretty lengthy COVID prevention training program. We put in place temperature checks and health wellness checks. So we started to do all of that. As we were originally told, we were going to reopen on July 5th. But as I mentioned, in mid-June, that timeline was speeded up. So we very quickly put together the finishing touches on things and started to reopen. We were doing a phased reopening over a 1-month period where 6 of our branches would open up each week. So we put together weekly training sessions for our employees, going through the procedures. We put through something called Guidelines for Healthy Living, which set forth all of the processes and procedures that employees had to go through. We were having them sign off those procedures so that they understood what the protocol would be. So we brought back many of our beloved employees. However, as everybody knows, the COVID cases began to increase dramatically after the reopening. And on July 13th, Mayor Garcetti decided to close gyms again for the second time. So this was incredibly devastating, obviously not only economically for us, but emotionally. We just brought back so many of our employees and we had to furlough them all over again. So we basically had to close before we had even fully reopened. So the WISE mission has always been to serve the community. However, once we realized the devastating impact that COVID was having on our operations, our employees, our families, and the communities, the LAY very quickly began to pivot our operations so we could be there for the community where the community needed us the most. So on March 18th, we started a grab-and-go meal program in partnership with the City Youth, Fresh Start, Food Forward, and LA Care. And we provided more than 700,000 meals to children to date. On March 18th, we also opened our childcare site for first responders. And since that time, we've expanded our childcare services for essential workers, and we currently have 9 childcare sites. So we do have a contact with the Department of Public Health, and I would encourage all of you to reach out to the Department of Public Health and form a relationship with somebody there. We have an advisor who we've worked very closely with, and he's really been instrumental in helping us formulate procedures and policies. As all of you know, there are various reopening protocols that the county has put forward, so we've been following those very closely. As you all also probably know, they change by the minute, by the hour, so we have changed our policies and procedures more times than I can count. For gyms, first we reopened, then they required gloves, and then we closed again. So just be prepared to pivot constantly and change things constantly. We also on March 20th began a food distribution center at our Weingart East LA branch to support seniors and local communities by delivering bags of groceries to them. This support quickly expanded to individuals with disabilities, immigrant families, and the community at large. So currently, we have food distribution centers in 5 of our branches, and each week we deliver more than 5,000 bags of groceries. Then on April 6th, in partnership with Mayor Garcetti and the LA City Sanitation Department, we opened 9 hygiene centers for the unsheltered in our branches. So as of today, we provided 15,700 showers for families and individuals who are experiencing homelessness. So through the donations from our generous members, we've also provided hygiene kits and food for individuals. So one of the last things we did was on March 26th, we've been partnering with the American Red Cross and UCLA Health to host blood drives. What the Red Cross was finding was because of fears surrounding coronavirus and so many businesses shut down, they literally had nobody to host the blood drives. So we were able to pivot our operations, open our facilities to host over 75 blood drives. So we're really excited about some of the great things we've done. So as the pandemic continues, the LAY continues to look at ways that we can assist our community during these unprecedented times. However, the challenge for us, like all of you, is we're a nonprofit charitable organization. So fortunately, we were able to get some funding from the city through our hygiene program. But other than that, we're not being paid at all for any of the other community efforts and essential services we're providing. So generally 50% of our revenue is derived from our membership. And we've been great. Our members have really hung with us for a long time, and they've been allowing us to use their membership fees as a donation, which has helped support us. But each month that the shutdown continues, we lose more and more members. So this was especially true with the second shutdown. So we're really struggling to find ways to fund our essentials programs, I'm sure like all of you. We're also self-insured for unemployment, which means that we pay 100% of this benefit for our eligible furloughed employees. So this alone is going to amount to several millions of dollars that the LAY will be paying out in benefits to furloughed staff. So as a result of this, our resources are sparse and depleting quickly, as I'm sure all of you can relate to as well. Our mission advancement team has done a wonderful job of expanding our fundraising efforts and our media presence. We've been featured in over 122 stories in more than 30 different news outlets. So that's been a shining point for us and exciting to at least get some positive press, which has also helped with donations. We've also, our board has been great. We're currently undergoing a $5 million campaign, which comes on the heels of a $1 million matching fund commitment from one of our board members. So we've been very lucky and fortunate. So although we've been fortunate with generous donors, as I've mentioned, with the second shutdown, a lot more members are pulling their memberships, putting them on hold. There is some donor fatigue, which I'm sure maybe Scott and some of the others can speak to. So we're struggling with how do we make our campaigns exciting and different, because there are so many people in need right now and so many ways that people can spend their dollars to help. So as the pandemic continues indefinitely, more families and more children will be in need, but there are also fewer providers to serve those needs. So we know it won't be easy, but the LAY is committed to serving those needs through additional fundraising campaigns, innovative programming, and creative partnerships. So that's been our experience. So
thank you, Dana. It's an amazing story. And interesting to hear about how the balance of trying to handle your own organization while rising to the occasion of helping those in need during this crisis as well. You have multiple pressures there. So thank you for sharing that initial story. Scott, we'd love to hear about you and TheaterWorks. I think many would agree this time with all the stresses we're all having personally, we'd love to have the arts and go to theater and have that as an outlet. Unfortunately, we can't. So we'd love to hear about what you're going through.
Sure, thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for joining. So I'm Scott Devine. I'm General Manager and CFO of TheaterWorks Silicon Valley. We're a producing theater company. We normally, in normal times, produce 8 main stage shows throughout the year. Our season is kind of a July to June season each year. And then we do a bunch of other education and new works readings and those kinds of things as well. So a lot of programming we would normally be presenting. So we, like so many people, mid-March got shut down. We were actually, when the governor reduced the number of people who could gather below 100, is essentially when we were closed for performances. That was March 12th. So we had a show on stage that was closed going forward from March 12th. By the 16th, the California had instituted the stay-at-home order, and so as of the 16th, we shifted our office operations from what had always been an in-person operation to working from home, and we've been doing that ever since. So that's kind of the basics of where we were. We had a show on stage and 2 more planned for the fiscal year that ended the end of June. So essentially on the 12th, when we canceled the show we had on stage, we had another show that was scheduled to start 3 weeks later, so we had to cancel that show as well. So we were canceling 2 shows right off the bat, dealing with, getting the information out to all of our subscribers and ticket buyers and all of those things. We were fortunate that we had a video capture of the show that was on our stage, and so we were able to get that out to our audience, so audience who had tickets could still see the performance that we had to close. So that was great, and allowed us, to keep some of that income coming in. We have obviously switched to as much online programming as we could do. Over the last 4.5 months, we've presented 4 of our, what we call our main stage, our full-length plays. We've presented 4 of them online for an audience to see in a couple different ways, through our own website, through some partner organizations. But we've been able to get 4 shows out, which is actually more main stage productions than we would have had if we were on stage during that time period. They obviously weren't new. They were things that we had done before and recorded, but they still are allowing us to get information, to get product out to our patrons. We've also switched all of our other programming, so we're doing New Works readings online. Our education programs have all shifted to online. So we kind of view ourselves as never really closing. We've had to shut down our productions, our in-person productions, but we're trying to work very hard to keep all of our operations moving, even though we can't get together as we used to. So that's kind of the basis of where we've been. We have offered, because we've had to cancel 3 shows, we've offered all of our patrons who had tickets to those shows options to either donate the tickets, take a voucher for use sometime in the future, or actually get a refund of those tickets. We've been quite fortunate. Of the 3 shows we've canceled to date, about 60% of our audience has been willing to donate those tickets back. So just essentially turn them into a donation, which is awesome. About another 20% has taken a voucher for some time in the future. So we've only had to actually refund about 20% of the tickets that we had sold for those shows, which has obviously helped us continue our operations. Although we did have to let go a number of artists directly related to the shows, like actors, designers, directors, those things, when the shows were closed. To date, we've been able to keep all of our full-time staff on. We were able to get a PPP loan, as I'm sure several of us have, which has allowed us to keep our staff on through at least the second week of August with our current funding. We're hopeful that there may be more funding, but that's where we are at the moment. Other than that, our reopening, although we haven't, again, we don't feel like we've closed. Our reopening is a little complicated because we have really a couple different things we need to reopen. So there's getting staff back to the office when we can get to that. We run our own scene shop and costume shops because we're building our own sets and costumes and things. So getting those back to work. Then our rehearsals, when we can get back to in-person, bringing actors, designers, directors, all those people together in a room to work on creating art again is obviously a challenge. And then finally, when we're able to get audience back in a theater to see a production and what that might look like. So just really quickly on those, to date, our offices are still virtually open. We're all working from home and continuing the work that we're doing. And we were working on a plan to reopen our offices in July. And as things have started to get worse with coronavirus a little bit again, and as we've had to push our season, so our season was supposed to start on July 1st, the new season. In May, we announced that we were going to push that back till October start. It's actually looking now like we might push that back even further, but we're working on those plans now. And so as it became clear that the spread was still going and we didn't need to be back in the office, we made the decision not to actually go back into our offices in July, not because of any edict from anybody else, but because it just didn't seem to make sense to us to put our employees in that risk when we didn't absolutely need to. Our shops, which basically fall under construction requirements, have pretty much remained open during this entire period. We shifted to doing some other things. Our costume shop, for instance, has been making masks since early April and providing those out to community organizations who need them free of charge to kind of help out. And then obviously rehearsals and actual productions are off in the future. We're still waiting for guidance on how many people may be allowed back in the theater, when that might happen, what social distancing might be needed in the theaters, and all of those things. So we have plans we're working on, but are still waiting for actual word from whoever is going to give us information on when and how we can get back into our spaces. So that's a little bit about where we are.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And I'm curious, both of you described making some pretty big decisions along the way and changing those decisions. And is there anything you can share about how you balanced being nimble, making quick decisions with the ever-changing rules versus being cautious and looking long-term? You know, Scott and TheaterWorks have seasonality to think about. And so how do you make those long-term decisions of being cautious versus balancing being quick and nimble. Anything you can share? Were there, who's involved? Is the board involved? Do you have multiple leadership folks? Is there differing opinions? How have you handled that?
Yeah, so I'll just jump in first. So we're like everybody else, just doing the best we can to lay out as many plans as we can and look as far into the future as we can. I think I shared with this group earlier. I think in a normal year we probably do 6 budget drafts as we're getting our budget together for a new year. I think this year we're somewhere around 16 right now. And those are spread over 5 different plans. So we had our original plan before all this happened that we were working on for a July 1 season, just like it normally would be. We pretty quickly after this switched to a new plan that had reduced capacity in the theaters, assuming that would be a thing. So we worked on that plan for a while. Then we switched to the October plan, which is where we currently are. But we also are working on a plan that says we might not reopen till early next year, maybe January, February, March. And then we're working on a final plan that is, what if we can't get back into performance at any point over that fiscal year? So we're trying to look as far out as we can, as quickly as we can, develop as many plans as we can, so that as we learn more, get more information from our union partners, because we have to deal with them and the government and all of those things, we have the plans in place to be able to make those decisions quickly and move forward. So that's a little bit about how we're handling it.
Dana, anything to add from the why, or is it a lot of similar? A common thing I heard there was, it's not just your decision. You have government agencies, you have unions, you have health officials, a lot of input and a lot of different opinions to balance, right?
Yeah, and I think the key here is really just to be flexible and willing to change and roll with the punches, because things do change by the day between the county health department guidelines and numbers, etc. So similar to Scott, we've gone through numerous budgets, numerous changes. What if we open in October? What if we don't open till after the first of the year? Looking at various ways. Do we do a phased reopening? Do we open everything at once? So I think it's really just being creative, and sometimes when you're very type A like I am, it's tough, but you just be flexible and nimble.
Something else that both of you mentioned in your comments was, it's cliche, but this idea of pivoting and having to pivot, it's related to what we just talked about. And Dana, you mentioned all the press, and the great press has been written, and something that we talked about was the unique situation the Y found itself in, where similar to what Scott said, you never really shut down. You just had to really innovate along the way in how you were taking people in who really needed to still come into your clubs in early days, or how you were protecting your employees who were still out in the field. Can you just talk a little bit about how you all were trying to stay safe, and some of the procedures that you adopted early on that maybe now we take for granted? And I know you shared one with us on the pre-call a little bit earlier that we had never heard of. Can you just talk a little bit to what you all are doing?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I think it's really important to reach out to your LA County Department of Public Health and formulate a relationship with somebody there who can advise you various protocols. If and when there is a COVID case, it's important to have that contact and get the advice. I had also mentioned previously to Jason, myself and my team, we all went through a class through Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health of contact tracing. It's a free 16-hour course that teaches you about contact tracing and COVID. So I think that's very helpful to put protocols in place. We are still somewhat remote for our metro location, but I'm here in the office now, and we've had to stagger workplaces. We had cubicles, so we moved cubicles to create physical distancing, doing silly things like taking all the common cutlery out of the kitchens, making sure that every area is disinfected regularly with something that's been proven to prevent COVID. So we've worked with our janitorial services to make sure that that's taken place. We've ordered lots of supplies. As you know, the requirement of masks, and employers are in fact required to provide those to employees at no cost. So we've invested a lot in PPE. We've also provided face shields, wipes, so everybody can clean and disinfect their areas. We've, as I already mentioned, we've put together protocols in place where we do something on a computer where you log in and you check off that you're not experiencing any symptoms. You need to temperature check yourselves each day. And in fact, I believe the county guidelines were just updated to now require that for offices. And I think we've done the same thing with respect to members, although of course now we have no members. So that's really what we were concentrating on, is sort of the health issues.
Yeah, and Dana, we've heard, I think you shared with us, and we've heard from other folks too, that there's challenges in getting employees to come back. You know, they're nervous. There's other financial challenges as well. There's challenges with childcare for themselves. So, you know, maybe your organization's a little bit on the forefront because you had tried to bring people back to some extent. And so it's a layered issue because there's various issues as it is relates to the government, as Mike pointed out, to health concerns, and then just to the crisis as it relates to your employees and what they're going through as well. So challenges, and I know you've all been very thoughtful on how you've tried to satisfy some of those, but there's really, unfortunately, not a perfect solution at this point.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Jason. Employees are scared. They're scared about themselves. They're scared for their families. So that's why we've worked so hard to put all of these safety protocols in place to go above and beyond what the orders require so that people do feel safe and comfortable. That's why I've come back to work to show people, look, I feel safe and comfortable with all the procedures we have. We put an extensive training program in place for our employees to go through PowerPoints. We have resources online for them, videos, how to wash your hands, signage. But the other problem you briefly mentioned was we do have a lot of minimum wage employees. The majority of our workforce is non-exempt hourly employees. So quite frankly, there's struggles financially because they are oftentimes making more money from unemployment than if they come back to work. So it's tempering those two things.
Yeah, and that's interesting about balancing the desire to get everybody back, employment and delivering your programs, but now you also have to consider their comfort levels, their concerns. And Scott, is that something you're dealing with? Are actors hesitant to be on stage when and if you can even do that? Or how are you going to handle rehearsals? Is it going to be over Zoom, or do you get in a conference room? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's definitely very important to us. I mean, it's the reason why we decided in July not to go back into the office space, because we didn't have to. And so why put our employees at that risk, even with all the plans, as Dana said, which we have in place as well. It just didn't seem like it was worth that risk if we didn't need to. We're busy right now we deal with 4 different major unions for our actors, designers, directors, musicians. And so we're busy right now as a collective unit with the other regional theaters, trying to negotiate with those unions what coming back might look like, what those safety plans might look like. I think it's likely when we get back that we will start rehearsals in kind of a Zoom format. Some theaters that are working now to try to get back earlier are bringing everybody together and quarantining them for 2 weeks, and then just keeping them together as a unit through the play, through the production, so that essentially once they get together in their quarantine, they hopefully will stay safe. But theaters are also, like us, are also looking at, when we come back, maybe we only do 1-person or 2-person shows for a while, so there's fewer people on stage and fewer people in the rehearsal room. And then obviously we're trying to deal with all the audience side of that as well. How many people can you really get into a theater, and what does that look like? So.
And what's that look like? You guys both touched a little bit on your membership and how you're interacting with them, maybe from a donor perspective, but from a production perspective, Scott, I mean, how have you guys thought about how do you deliver your productions, your program? Are you going to start with only your season ticket holders, for example, and not open up to general sales? Is there any thought about that?
Yeah, so we've So our plans at the moment are that the 8 plays. So we had already announced what our next 8 shows were going to be for our new season when this happened, and we had already sold a significant amount of tickets to our subscribers for those shows. So our plan number 1 is to present those shows whenever we can. So if we can't start in October, whenever we can start, those will be the 8 shows we will deliver. So we can continue to tell our patrons that they're going to get what they've purchased at some point. Our plan at the moment, when we can get back on stage, is to, we assume there will be social distancing in the theater, so that will limit how many people we can get in the theater. So we're looking at a number of ideas. One is larger theaters so that we can still get our audience in, but keep them further away from each other. The other thing we're working on with our union partners now is developing some rules around the ability to stream it so that we could do the shows live on stage to a small audience, while you could buy a ticket and stay at home if you wanted to, and see that same night's production from the comfort of your home. So we're looking at all those kinds of ideas of how we can get the programming out, and then to keep our patrons, both ticket buyers and donors, engaged. In the meantime, we're trying to put out, as I said, we've put out 4 of our main stage shows as videos so they can see them at home, other programming on video at home, so we can keep them engaged through this process. Most of those to our audience are done at no cost. We found it very difficult to monetize that stuff anyways. It seems like people don't want to pay a lot for that. So we're essentially just giving it to our audience to keep them engaged through this process. We've actually been very successful. Just one more thing on that. We've actually been very successful. The first one of those we did was a production of Pride and Prejudice, which we had done earlier in the season and just happened to record for later release. And when we released that in April, so one of our normal shows ends about 10,000 people normally see one of our productions. That video that we released in the first weekend it was released, 160,000 people viewed it in 20 different countries. So it really expanded the reach of our audience.
Yeah, I think that idea, again, there's not really any positives that are coming out of a global pandemic, but we've heard from a lot of organizations trying to rethink their reach, their audience, their constituents. You talk about your mission for both your organizations. They really are maybe broader than just the people that we thought of before. And so is there an opportunity there to just, tell the story a little wider and at least share it with more people and see if there's any more people who want to support, because the need is so great. I think Dana talked about it's been successful. There's been great donors. There's been great compassion. Scott, you talked about that as well, but the need's so great, and it's only probably going to get bigger. And I think, as we've gone through this call series, honestly, we hoped at this point we would have a lot of really great answers, a lot of great advice for people. But the honest truth is that it's an evolving picture. And Dana, I wrote this down when we were having some of our pre-calls. You said literally every day the plan changes. And I think, part of our goal has really been to let people know that, they're not going through this alone and that they have a lot of the same questions. And it's about being nimble and being honest and transparent with your board and your constituents, and then just really trying to do the best you can to adjust and not understanding that you're not going to have the plan nailed down every day, because none of us have really gone through this before. And so I'm sure that doesn't make either of your jobs very easy, but that's, at some point, there's probably a reality check of that's where you're at.
I'm curious, as we start to look forward, Dana or Scott, have either of you and your organization started thinking about not only getting back to normal, but is the new normal going to be completely different? Are you going to deliver your mission in a drastically different way forever, potentially? Have you guys started thinking through just how this whole crisis might change what the normal is in the long term? Have you started looking that far yet? Or are you still in crisis mode, put out fires, let's get back to normal?
Well, I think for us, it's both, right? Crisis mode, how are we going to sustain ourselves? When are we going to reopen? How are we going to reopen? But to your point, the new normal, to be honest, when we did reopen for that short period of time, we only had 10% of the people coming back. So even if we do reopen in September, October, are people going to feel comfortable coming? It doesn't make sense to open all of our branches. Does it make sense to open all of our branches from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m.? So we are looking that. We're also obviously looking into expanding virtual, going into sort of the virtual programming for our classes, for our teens. What are the opportunities with children being home, learning from home? How can the Y step in and help in that regard and be there for the community when the community needs us? But I think most importantly, we really have gotten into this new area of all of these essential services. And how do we continue to provide all those essential services? How do we get the funding to do that? So we're struggling with all of those questions.
Yeah, I mean, we're similar. I think we're hopeful that eventually we will get back to kind of pre-COVID normal, whatever that was for organizations. We've stopped using the term new normal or anything like that. We've been saying the next normal, because we kind of believe that it's just going to be a progression for a while, maybe even a couple of years. At some point we'll be able to get some people back into the theater, but some people won't want to come back into the theater. And so how will we deal with that? And then as more come back, what will that look like? And so we see it as kind of an evolution. So we think there's going to be, and we're trying to plan for a series of new normal or next normals until we can get back to what was maybe pre-COVID at some point.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'll quick reminder to everyone listening in, if you do have specific questions for Dana or Scott, please feel free to type them in, and we'll make sure that they can answer those. We're getting close to the hour. I'm curious, we can maybe shift to hopefully trying to find some silver linings in all of this, some positive takeaways, if there are. Scott, you shared a great story of the simple shift of a virtual production. Wow, the exposure that you got from that, and how great that is for TheaterWorks. Is there anything else like that? Any takeaway that you sat back and thought, this is a positive?
Well, it's not, I wouldn't necessarily call it a positive, although it certainly has helped us. We're so thrilled with the commitment of our audience to continue to donate things back and continue to donate. Our fiscal year-end donations, which ended in June, were on par with last year. And so all of those people continued to give so far this year. It's early, but it looks like everything's continuing. So the generosity of our audience and our patrons is great. That they're staying committed to us is great. And I think we're working to continue to develop new ways to engage our audience in these virtual realms is a positive that we'll try to carry forward, even if tomorrow we got back to normal, the old normal. We would want to carry some of these things forward because they're helping us engage audiences in a new way. So that's a great positive for us.
Any, maybe as a final question, is there one tip, if you could share with your peers that are listening, is there one take, there's been a lot of things you guys are doing, you're wearing multiple hats, you're putting out fires, but is there one thing everyone's got to be focusing on that might be applicable to all nonprofits, regardless of your mission, that they really just need to take priority number one?
Well, I think it's how do you just continue to service the community going forward. And as Scott mentioned, there are a couple of silver linings. As I mentioned, we've always been there for the community, but we are really here for the community now. And how do we continue to do all of that good work ahead? And in terms of advice, as I mentioned, partner with your public health official. I cannot stress the importance of that enough going forward, because so much of what we do is going to be depend on compliance with those orders and getting things right and doing things right. And again, as we've said before, be nimble, be open, be innovative, be creative.
Yeah, I would just echo what Dana said. I think being nimble and creative, re-looking at really everything that you do and how, given where we are today, you can continue to do that or create new ways to do that. I think it is really important. I mean, we've tried to focus on, rethinking everything in this new environment, and how can that help us going forward. We continue to look for ways to use this to strengthen ourselves, so that when we come out of this on the other side, our programs are better and stronger.
Well, great. We want to thank both of you for joining us today and all of your insights and advice and hard work at your organizations. And we want to thank everybody for joining us on the call and joining us for the survey and the 3 calls, really. And a lot of resources, a lot of notes. The webinar replays will be available on both of our websites, Armonino and Canterbury. And if you have any questions with any of your needs for Armonino, I know Mike is happy and available and ready. And if you have anything that Canterbury can help with on strategy or investments or your asset allocation, please let us know. We'd love to help out. And really just want to thank everybody who joined us for these webinars, and thank our speakers today, and appreciate all the great work that our nonprofits are doing. As we talked about, the need has really never been greater than it is right now. So we'll wish everybody a great day, and thank everybody.